The crack of lightning illuminated Olivia Walker's face as she descended the rickety cellar steps, her hands trembling as she clutched an oil lamp that barely cut through the darkness below. The year was 1873, and the small settlement of Watsonville, California, was experiencing the most severe rainstorm anyone could remember in decades. "Just a quick check on the preserves," Olivia muttered to herself, trying to calm her nerves as thunder boomed overhead. Her late father's voice echoed in her mind, always reminding her to be prepared. Since his passing 6 months ago, the 22-year-old had been managing their small farm alone, determined to prove to the townsfolk that a woman could succeed without a husband. The cellar was cool and damp, the earthen walls lined with shelves of carefully preserved fruits and vegetables that would see her through the winter. Olivia set the lamp on a small table and began inspecting jars, counting her stores methodically. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the ground with unnatural force. She didn't notice the first trickle of water seeping under the cellar door until it touched her boots. Startled, Olivia turned toward the entrance, her heart sinking as she watched water begin to flow down the wooden steps. Not a trickle but a steady stream, growing stronger with each passing second. "No, no, no," she gasped, hurrying toward the stairs. Before she reached them, there was an ominous crack from outside, the sound of earth giving way, followed by a roar of water that hit the cellar doors with explosive force. The doors burst open, and a wall of muddy water cascaded down. Olivia screamed as the frigid torrent knocked her backward, extinguishing her lamp and plunging the cellar into darkness. The water rose with terrifying speed, reaching her waist within seconds. She struggled toward the stairs, but the current was too strong, pushing her back against the far wall. "Help!" she cried out, knowing it was futile. Her nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, and no one would hear her over the storm. The water climbed higher, reaching her chest, then her shoulders. Olivia clawed at the shelves, trying to pull herself up, but they collapsed under her weight, sending jars crashing into the murky water. As the water reached her chin, Olivia's thoughts raced through memories of her family, of the farm she had fought so hard to keep. She thought of all the dreams she'd never realize: marriage, children, seeing the ocean. Was this really how her story would end? The water lifted her from the ground, her head bumping against the low ceiling. She gasped for air in the shrinking pocket between water and wood, panic overwhelming her senses as darkness closed in. Yards away, riding through the downpour with his hat pulled low, Yates Keller urged his exhausted horse forward. The 30-year-old cowboy had been caught in the open when the storm hit, returning from delivering cattle to the neighboring ranch. Seeking shelter, he'd spotted the Walker farm in the distance, a place he knew only by reputation, having arrived in Watsonville just 2 months earlier. His horse balked, sensing something wrong as they approached the farmhouse. That's when Yates saw it, a flash flood tearing through a gully that hadn't existed hours before, water pouring directly into what appeared to be a cellar opening. "Whoa, boy," he called, dismounting and squinting through the rain. A sick feeling formed in his gut when he thought he heard a scream from the direction of the cellar. Without hesitation, Yates ran toward the sound, fighting against the rain and wind. He reached the cellar entrance and found himself looking down into a dark pool of swirling water that had nearly filled the underground space. The storm had triggered a flash flood that redirected a creek right into the cellar. There was no sign of anyone below, but he'd been certain he'd heard a cry. "Hello," he shouted. "Anyone down there?" Only the roar of water answered him. Acting on instinct, Yates stripped off his heavy coat and boots. He took a deep breath and plunged into the icy water. The shock of cold nearly paralyzed him, but he forced himself deeper into the darkness, feeling his way along the ceiling of the cellar, searching desperately. His lungs began to burn as he swam blindly through the murky water. Just as he was about to surface for air, his outstretched hand touched something soft fabric, and beneath it, a human form. Olivia was floating unconsciously near the ceiling, her face in the last tiny pocket of air. With powerful strokes, Yates wrapped an arm around her waist and kicked upward, fighting the current pulling them both down. His legs pumped frantically as his own breath ran out, spots dancing before his eyes. They broke the surface in a violent splash, Yates gasping and coughing as he pulled Olivia's limp body toward the cellar entrance. The flood waters continued to pour in, making their escape treacherous. Using every ounce of strength, Yates pushed Olivia up and out before hauling himself after her. On solid ground, Yates turned Olivia onto her side, watching anxiously as water poured from her mouth. "Come on, breathe," he urged, his voice barely audible above the storm. When she remained still, he began pressing on her back, desperate to force the water from her lungs. After what felt like an eternity, Olivia convulsed, coughing violently as water spewed from her mouth. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "You're all right now," Yates said, relief flooding through him. "I've got you." Olivia stared up at the stranger leaning over her, his dark hair plastered to his face, water streaming from his soaked clothes. "Who?" she began, but another coughing fit overtook her. "Name's Yates Keller. We need to get you inside and warm," he said, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. "Where's your family?" "No family," she managed between coughs. "Just me." The rain continued to pound them as Yates carried Olivia toward the farmhouse, his horse following behind. The small, well-kept house was dark, but mercifully intact despite the storm's fury. Yates kicked the door open and carried Olivia inside. "Kitchen?" he asked tersely. "Through there," she pointed weakly. Her entire body felt leaden and she couldn't stop shivering. Yates laid her carefully on a chair and moved with surprising efficiency for a man in a strange house. He found matches and lit the stove, building up the fire as quickly as possible. Water pooled on the floor around them both. "You need dry clothes," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Can you manage?" Olivia nodded, though she wasn't sure her trembling limbs would cooperate. "My room is upstairs." First door. While Yates busied himself with the stove and gathering blankets, Olivia struggled up the stairs, each step a monumental effort. In her bedroom, she peeled off her sodden dress with numb fingers, replacing it with a nightgown and her warmest robe. Her hair hung in a heavy, dripping mass down her back. When she returned downstairs, Yates had somehow managed to brew coffee and was standing by the stove in his undershirt, his outer clothes draped over chairs to dry. He turned at her entrance, relief evident on his face. "Thought you might have collapsed up there," he said, pouring a cup of coffee and pressing it into her hands. "Drink this. It'll help with the chill." Olivia accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "I don't know how to thank you if you hadn't come along." She couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of her near death too overwhelming. "Was just passing by," Yates said modestly, "heading back to town when the storm hit. You're from Watsonville. I don't recall seeing you before. Been here about 2 months, working at the Hendricks Ranch." He sipped his own coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You're the Walker girl, right? The one running her pa's farm alone." Olivia stiffened slightly. "That's right, and managing just fine until today." A small smile tugged at Yates's lips. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Walker." For the first time, Olivia took a proper look at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly as it dried. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with a strong jaw and keen blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Despite his current disheveled state, there was something undeniably handsome about him. "Please call me Olivia," she said, suddenly self-conscious in her night clothes before a stranger. "And truly, Mr. Keller, I owe you my life." "Yates," he corrected, "and you don't owe me anything." He moved to the window, peering out at the relentless storm. "Don't think I'll make it back to town tonight. Creek's probably overflowed the road by now." The implication hung in the air between them. He would need to stay the night. Propriety demanded outrage at such a suggestion, but practicality won out. He had saved her life, after all, and the storm showed no signs of abating. "You can sleep in the spare room," Olivia said decisively. "It was my father's. I'll prepare it for you." "Much obliged," Yates replied, returning to the stove to add more wood. "Storm's likely to blow over by morning." As Olivia prepared the bedroom upstairs, she couldn't help but wonder at the strange twist of fate that had brought Yates Keller to her farm at precisely the right moment. Had he been mere minutes later, she would have drowned in that cellar. Another tragedy in a town that had seen its share of hardship. By the time she returned downstairs, Yates had hung his damp clothes near the stove and was sitting at her kitchen table, looking strangely at home. He'd found her father's old checkerboard and had set it up. "Thought you might want something to take your mind off things," he explained, "unless you'd prefer to rest." "No," Olivia said quickly, the thought of being alone with her thoughts and the memory of water closing over her head suddenly terrifying. "A game would be nice." They played in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, the rain against the windows, and the soft click of checker pieces on the board. Olivia found herself studying Yates when he was concentrating on his moves, the way his brow furrowed slightly, the careful precision of his large, calloused hands as he moved the pieces. "How did you end up in Watsonville?" she asked finally. Yates didn't look up from the board. "Heard they needed experienced hands at the Hendricks place. Been moving around since the war ended. Never stayed in one place too long." "You fought in the war," he nodded, a shadow crossing his features. "Union Army. Too young when it started, but joined up in '63. Saw things no man should see." The simple admission revealed volumes. Like many veterans, Yates carried invisible scars. Olivia had seen men return from the conflict changed, haunted by memories they couldn't escape. "My father lost his brother at Gettysburg," she said softly. "Never quite recovered from it." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your move," he said, gesturing to the board. The evening continued with sporadic conversation, punctuated by comfortable silences. Olivia learned that Yates had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who taught him the trade before he left for the war. He'd worked as a farrier, a rancher, a horse trainer, whatever jobs would keep him moving westward. Watsonville was just another stop in a long journey with no particular destination. "What about you?" Yates asked as they began their third game. "Most women your age would have married by now, not running a farm alone." "Most women don't have much choice," Olivia replied, her tone sharper than she'd intended. "I had suitors, of course, good men who offered security and respectability. But not love." Olivia's eyes snapped up to meet his, surprised by the directness of the question. "No," she admitted after a pause. "Not love, and I've seen too many women trapped in loveless marriages to make that mistake." She moved a checker decisively across the board. "This farm is my independence. As long as I have it, I answer to no one." Yates studied her with newfound appreciation. "Admirable stance. Rare, too. Not everyone thinks so. Most of the town believes I'm either stubborn or foolish." "Could be both," Yates said with a slight smile. "Could also be brave." Something warm unfurled in Olivia's chest at his words. It had been so long since anyone had seen her choices as brave rather than misguided. The moment stretched between them, filled with an unspoken understanding. Finally, Olivia stood, suddenly aware of how late it had grown. "I should check that your room is ready," she said, needing a moment away from his perceptive gaze. That night, despite her exhaustion, Olivia lay awake listening to the storm and the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving in the bedroom across the hall. For the first time since her father's death, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Eventually, cradled by the rhythmic patter of rain against her window, she drifted into sleep. She dreamed of water filling her lungs, of darkness pressing in from all sides. In her dream, she was sinking, struggling, her limbs leaden and unresponsive. Just as panic overwhelmed her, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her upward toward light and air. She woke with a gasp, sheets twisted around her, heart racing. Dawn brought clear skies and the aftermath of the storm's fury. From her bedroom window, Olivia could see branches scattered across her yard, a portion of the fence damaged, and the ground saturated with water. But the house stood intact, and for that, she was grateful. When she descended to the kitchen, Olivia found it empty but not undisturbed. The stove was lit, coffee was brewing, and a note sat on the table, "Gone to check the damage and tend to my horse. Back shortly." Olivia busied herself with preparing breakfast, trying to ignore the strange emptiness she felt knowing Yates would soon ride back to town. He was a stranger, after all, a kind stranger who had saved her life, but a stranger nonetheless. She was frying bacon when the door opened, and Yates entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and damp earth. His clothes had dried overnight, though his boots still bore evidence of mud. "Good morning," Olivia greeted, oddly shy in the daylight. "I hope you're hungry." "Starving," Yates admitted, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door, a gesture so natural it seemed he'd done it 100 times before. "Your cellar's a complete loss, I'm afraid. Still flooded up to the middle steps, and most of what was in there is ruined." Olivia nodded, having expected as much. "The preserves can be replaced. I'm just grateful to be alive to do the replacing." She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Please, eat while it's hot." They breakfasted together, discussing the storm's damage. The creek had indeed overflowed its banks, rerouting itself through Olivia's property and directly into her cellar. The road to town was passable but muddy, and Yates reported seeing other farms with damaged outbuildings as he'd ridden the perimeter of her property. "Your south fence needs repair," he said between bites. "About 20 feet of it's down, and that oak near the barn lost a big limb." "I'll manage," Olivia said automatically. Yates set down his fork. "I didn't say you couldn't, but I'm offering to help if you'll let me." Olivia looked up, surprised. "Don't you need to get back to the Hendricks ranch?" "I was due a day off anyway," Yates shrugged. "And Hendricks is a reasonable man. He'll understand when I explain." "I couldn't ask that of you." "You didn't ask, I offered." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Besides, seems wrong to leave a lady with so much work after she fed me such a fine breakfast." Despite herself, Olivia smiled. "Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse?" They spent the day working side by side, clearing debris, repairing the fence, and salvaging what they could from the cellar once the water level had receded enough to safely enter. Yates worked with quiet efficiency, neither showing off nor condescending to Olivia when she insisted on doing her share. As the afternoon sun warmed the rain-soaked earth, Olivia found herself watching Yates as he split wood for her depleted woodpile. There was something mesmerizing about the fluid strength in his movements, the controlled power as the axe swung down to cleave each log perfectly. "You're staring, Miss Walker," Yates called out, not turning around. Olivia flushed, embarrassed to be caught. "Just making sure you're doing it right," she retorted, trying to save face. Yates turned then, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "And am I meeting your exacting standards?" "You'll do," she replied primly, turning away to hide her deepening blush. By late afternoon, most of the essential repairs were complete. Olivia insisted that Yates stay for supper before riding back to town, a small way of expressing her gratitude for his help. As she prepared the meal, she found herself moving with unusual care, selecting her best dishes and taking extra time with the presentation. They ate by lamplight, the kitchen warm and fragrant with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Yates complimented her cooking repeatedly, cleaning his plate with an enthusiasm that made Olivia's heart swell with unexpected pride. "You know," Yates said as they finished the last of the apple pie, "I've been thinking about your cellar. The way that creek redirected itself, there's a good chance it could happen again with another heavy rain." "I had the same thought," Olivia admitted. "Father always said that cellar was dug in the wrong place, but it was there when he bought the property, and he never got around to changing it. Might be wise to fill it in and dig a new one on higher ground," Yates suggested. "It's a big job, though, not something you should tackle alone." Olivia's pride bristled slightly. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Keller." "Never doubted it for a second, Miss Walker," he replied easily. "But there's a difference between strong and foolhardy. Even the strongest men don't dig cellars alone." "Are you offering your services again?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "I might be," Yates said, his eyes holding hers, "if you'd accept them." Something in his gaze made Olivia's breath catch. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." Yates considered her question for a moment. "Maybe I'd like to change that," he said finally. "Get to know you better, I mean." The simple admission hung in the air between them, transforming the atmosphere from friendly to something altogether more charged. Olivia didn't know how to respond. After years of guarding her independence so carefully, the idea of letting someone, especially a man, into her carefully constructed world was both terrifying and strangely alluring. "I should go," Yates said when she remained silent. "It'll be dark soon, and the roads are still bad." Olivia nodded, feeling oddly disappointed. "Of course, let me pack some of that pie for you to take." At the door, Yates turned to her, hat in hand. "I meant what I said about helping with that cellar. I'm off on Sundays. I could come by next week." "That would be kind of you," Olivia managed, suddenly flustered by his proximity. "It's settled then," Yates said, settling his hat on his head. "Sunday." As she watched him ride away, Olivia was struck by the strange emptiness that seemed to fill the farmhouse in his absence. For someone who had been in her life less than a day, Yates Keller had left an inexplicably deep impression. True to his word, Yates returned the following Sunday, arriving just after dawn with tools, supplies, and a determined set to his jaw. Over the next several weeks, a pattern developed. Each Sunday, Yates would arrive early and stay until dusk, working alongside Olivia to first fill in the old cellar, then dig and construct a new one on higher ground. Their easy companionship deepened with each passing week. Olivia found herself looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation that both thrilled and alarmed her. She began preparing special meals for their shared lunches, setting aside the ripest fruits and tenderest cuts of meat. If Yates noticed her efforts, he never commented directly, but his appreciative looks and clean plates spoke volumes. As April turned to May, the new cellar began taking shape. Built into a small rise at the north end of the property, it was larger and sturdier than the old one, with thick wooden support beams and proper drainage channels that would prevent flooding even in the severest storms. "Your father would be proud," Yates remarked one Sunday as they stood surveying their work. "It's a fine cellar." "Our work," Olivia corrected him. "I couldn't have done this without you." Yates looked at her, a peculiar softness in his normally guarded expression. "You could have. Might have taken longer, but you'd have found a way. You're the most determined woman I've ever met. Olivia Walker." Her name on his lips sent a pleasant shiver through her. Over the weeks, they had gradually shifted from formal address to first names, but each time Yates said her name, it felt significant somehow. "What will you do with your Sundays when the cellar is finished?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Yates was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thought I might find other reasons to ride out this way," he said finally. "If I'd be welcome." "You would be," Olivia said softly. "Very welcome." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibility. Then Yates cleared his throat and turned back toward the cellar. "Should finish the roof next week. Then we can start on the shelving." As spring bloomed across the valley, so too did something between Olivia and Yates. Their Sunday work sessions extended beyond the cellar project to other improvements around the farm: a repaired chicken coop, a strengthened barn roof, a new garden plot for Olivia's herbs. After work, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset while sharing stories of their pasts. Olivia learned about Yates's childhood in Missouri, about his 3 sisters and his mother who had died when he was 12. He spoke of the war in brief, haunted fragments, enough for Olivia to understand that he had seen horrors he still couldn't fully process. In turn, she told him about growing up as an only child, about her mother's death from influenza when Olivia was 16, and about her father's determination that she receive an education unusual for a farmer's daughter. "He taught me everything he knew about farming," she explained one evening as they shelled peas together. "Said there was no reason a woman couldn't run land as well as a man if she had the knowledge." "Smart man, your father," Yates commented. "Raised a remarkable daughter." The compliment warmed Olivia more than it should have. She had long since stopped trying to deny her growing feelings for Yates. What had begun as gratitude had transformed into admiration, then friendship, and finally something deeper that she dared not name, even to herself. Their comfortable routine continued through May and into early June. The cellar was finished, sturdy and practical, ready to store the summer's bounty for the coming winter. Still, Yates continued to arrive each Sunday, finding new projects around the farm or simply sitting with Olivia, talking or reading in companionable silence. The townsfolk had begun to notice, of course. Olivia heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies, speculations about the nature of her relationship with the quiet cowboy from the Hendricks ranch. Some of the comments were unkind, suggesting impropriety, but Olivia held her head high. She knew the truth: nothing inappropriate had occurred between them, even if her dreams sometimes suggested scenarios that made her wake breathless and flushed. One Sunday in mid-June, Yates arrived with an unusual request. "Town's having a social next Saturday," he said as they walked the perimeter of her property, checking fences. "Dancing, food, the usual affair. Thought you might like to go." Olivia glanced at him, surprised. "Are you asking to escort me, Mr. Keller?" she teased. "I am indeed, Miss Walker," he replied, his tone serious despite his smile. Properly and with honorable intentions. The formality of his response made Olivia laugh, even as her heart quickened. "Then I accept, sir, though I warn you I haven't danced in ages." "That makes 2 of us," Yates admitted, "but I reckon we'll manage not to disgrace ourselves too badly." The week before the social passed in a blur of anticipation for Olivia. She spent evenings altering her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and worrying about how the town would react to seeing them together publicly. For all the gossip, this would be the first time they had appeared as a couple in Watsonville society. When Saturday arrived, Olivia spent more time than usual on her appearance, washing her hair with lavender-scented soap and arranging it in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. She pinched color into her cheeks and dabbed a precious drop of rose water behind each ear, a gift from her father years ago that she had saved for special occasions. Yates arrived precisely at the agreed time, sitting tall and handsome on his freshly groomed horse. He had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new trousers. His normally untamed hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. When Olivia emerged from the house, his expression of open admiration made her blush. "You look beautiful," he said simply, dismounting to offer her his hand. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather nicely yourself." The ride to town was filled with a nervous excitement neither of them acknowledged directly. Olivia was acutely aware of Yates sitting behind her on the horse, his arms around her waist as they rode double, his chest solid and warm against her back. The propriety of arriving together on one horse might be questionable, but Olivia's old mare wasn't up to the journey, and she refused to let such details spoil the evening. The town square had been transformed for the social, with lanterns strung between trees and tables laden with food prepared by the women of Watsonville. A small band played on a raised platform, and couples were already dancing on a wooden floor constructed specially for the occasion. As they dismounted at the edge of the square, Olivia felt the weight of curious stares. Yates must have sensed her tension, for he offered his arm with formal courtesy. "Shall we?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "We shall," Olivia agreed, placing her hand on his arm with deliberate confidence. They moved through the crowd, stopping to greet acquaintances. Yates was polite but reserved with the townspeople, while Olivia exchanged pleasantries with women she knew from church and market days. If some of the older matrons looked disapprovingly at their joined arms, neither Olivia nor Yates appeared to notice. "Miss Walker, how lovely to see you in town," called Mrs. Prescott, the doctor's wife and one of the few women who had been consistently kind to Olivia after her father's death. "And with company, I see." "Good evening, Mrs. Prescott," Olivia replied warmly. "May I introduce Mr. Yates Keller? Yates, this is Mrs. Eleanor Prescott, Madam," Yates said, tipping his hat respectfully. "A pleasure." Mrs. Prescott's eyes twinkled as she looked between them. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Keller. I've heard quite a bit about you from Mr. Hendricks. He speaks very highly of your work." "That's kind of him," Yates replied, seeming genuinely pleased. "Will you be staying in Watsonville long, Mrs.?" Prescott asked, the question innocent but loaded with implication. Yates glanced at Olivia before answering. "I believe I might. The valley agrees with me." "Does it indeed?" Mrs. Prescott smiled knowingly. "Well, we're always glad to welcome good people to our community. Now, you two should enjoy the dancing before all the best songs are played. Young people shouldn't waste time chatting with old women like me." As Mrs. Prescott moved away, Yates turned to Olivia with a raised eyebrow. "Subtle, isn't she?" Olivia laughed. "Mrs. Prescott has married off half the county, if town gossip is to be believed. I should have warned you she'd be matchmaking the moment she saw us together." "Should I be concerned?" Yates asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Only if you object to the match," Olivia replied boldly, surprising herself with her forwardness. Yates's smile was slow and warm. "I don't believe I do, Miss Walker." He extended his hand toward the dance floor. "Would you honor me with a dance?" They joined the other couples as the band struck up a lively reel. Yates was a better dancer than he had claimed, moving with the same natural grace he showed in his work. Olivia followed his lead, laughing as he twirled her through the steps. For those few minutes, she forgot about the watching eyes and whispered comments, lost in the joy of the music and the solid presence of Yates's hands guiding her. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, sampled the potluck supper, and conversed with various townspeople. Olivia noticed a gradual warming in the community's reception of them. By the time the band announced the last dance, a slow waltz, even the most gossipy of the town matrons were smiling indulgently in their direction. "One more?" Yates asked, offering his hand. Olivia nodded, allowing him to lead her back to the dance floor. As they swayed to the gentle rhythm, Yates held her closer than propriety strictly allowed. Olivia found she didn't care. "I've been thinking," Yates said quietly, his voice for her ears alone, "about putting down roots." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "Have you?" He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Hendricks offered me a permanent position, foreman with a share in next year's profits." "That's wonderful," Olivia said sincerely. "You deserve it." "It would mean staying in Watsonville," Yates continued, his tone careful. "Settling here permanently." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'd like that," she said softly, "having you nearby, just nearby." Yates asked, his voice dropping lower. The dance ended before Olivia could formulate a response, the final notes of the waltz fading into applause. Around them, couples began dispersing, gathering belongings and bidding farewell to friends. The moment had passed, but the question remained, hovering between them like a tangible thing. The ride home was quieter than their journey to town, both lost in their own thoughts as Yates's horse carried them through the moonlit countryside. When they reached Olivia's farm, Yates helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Olivia said, suddenly reluctant for the night to end. "The pleasure was mine," Yates replied, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'll see you tomorrow." "For our usual Sunday, I'd like that," Olivia nodded, relief washing through her that their routine would continue. Yates hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Yates," she whispered, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. Inside her house, Olivia leaned against the closed door, her hand still tingling from his touch. Something had shifted between them tonight, a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. The question was, where would they go from here? The answer came sooner than she expected. The next morning, Olivia woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching her farm far earlier than Yates's usual Sunday arrival. Curious, she dressed quickly and hurried downstairs just as a knock sounded at her door. Yates stood on her porch, looking as though he hadn't slept, still wearing the clothes from the social the night before. "Yates, is something wrong?" Olivia asked, alarmed by his disheveled appearance. "No," he said quickly. "Nothing's wrong. He broke off, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about what I should have said last night, what I've wanted to say for weeks now." Olivia's heart began to race. "And what's that?" "That I love you," Yates said simply, the words falling between them like stones in still water. "That I think I've loved you since the day I pulled you from that cellar, that I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Olivia felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For so long, she had defined herself by her independence, her ability to stand alone. The idea of allowing someone else into her life, of sharing her burdens and joys, had seemed like an admission of weakness. But standing before this man who had seen her strength and admired it, who had worked beside her as an equal, Olivia suddenly understood that love didn't have to mean surrender. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily, naturally, as though she'd been waiting her whole life to speak them. "And yes, I'll have you, however you want me." The tension in Yates's face melted into joy. He stepped forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I want you as my wife, Olivia Walker, my partner in all things." "Then that's what I'll be," she promised, leaning into his touch. When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Olivia responded with a passion that surprised them both. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him as though he feared she might vanish if he didn't hold tight. They were married 3 weeks later in Watsonville's small church, with Mrs. Prescott beaming in the front pew as though she'd arranged the whole thing herself. Yates wore a new suit, and Olivia carried wildflowers gathered from their fields that morning. The ceremony was simple, the celebration afterward warm and joyful. Yates continued working as foreman at the Hendricks Ranch, riding out each morning and returning each evening to the farm that was now their shared home. Together, they expanded the operations, adding more chickens and a small dairy herd. The money Yates earned supplemented the farm's income, allowing them to make improvements that Olivia had only dreamed of before. The first anniversary of their meeting arrived with spring rains that, though heavy, posed no threat to their new cellar. To commemorate the occasion, Yates presented Olivia with a locket containing a small dried flower. "What is this?" she asked, examining the tiny purple blossom. "It's from the wildflowers that were growing near the old cellar," he explained. "I picked it the day after the flood when I came back to help. Kept it as a reminder of how quickly life can change." Olivia's eyes welled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. "From disaster to blessing," she murmured, reaching up to kiss him. Their first child, a son they named James after Olivia's father, arrived the following winter, strong and healthy despite being born during a fierce December storm. As Olivia held their son, with Yates sitting beside her on their bed, his eyes filled with wonder and love, she thought about the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, watching as James wrapped his tiny hand around his father's finger. "If the flood hadn't happened, if you hadn't been passing by?" "Sometimes," Yates admitted, gently stroking their son's dark hair. "But then, I remember something my mother used to say, that God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes what seems like our darkest moment is really the beginning of our greatest joy." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. I think she was right. As the years passed, the Walker Keller farm flourished, as did their family. A daughter joined them 2 years after James, followed by twin boys 3 years later. The old farmhouse expanded to accommodate their growing brood, with Yates adding rooms and a larger kitchen with his own hands. Olivia never lost her independence or her determination, but she discovered the joy of shared dreams and the strength that came from true partnership. Yates found the home he had been searching for since the war, a place where the ghosts that had driven him westward finally quieted. Every year, on the anniversary of the flood, they would walk together to the site of the old cellar, now nothing more than a gentle depression in the earth covered with wildflowers. There they would stand, hand in hand, remembering the disaster that had brought them together, and silently giving thanks for the life they had built from it. And if their children ever complained about having to help dig out the new cellar after heavy rains, Olivia and Yates would exchange knowing smiles. "You never know," Yates would tell them with a wink at his wife. A flooded cellar might be the best thing that ever happens to you. On their 20th anniversary, long after Watsonville had grown from a small settlement into a proper town, Olivia found Yates standing by the old cellar site alone, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, slipping her hand into his. He turned to her with the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "I was just thinking about that day. How terrified I was when I dove into that water, not knowing if I'd find you in time." "But you did," Olivia reminded him, leaning against his shoulder. "Best dive I ever took," Yates said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Came up with a treasure beyond price." "Smooth talker," Olivia teased, though her eyes shone with love. "Only with you," he replied, bending to kiss her as tenderly as he had on their wedding day. Behind them, their oldest son James called from the farmhouse, announcing that the anniversary celebration was ready to begin. Their children had planned a surprise gathering, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. "We should go back," Olivia said, though she made no move to leave Yates's embrace. "In a minute," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm still not done thanking that flood for bringing you into my life. After 20 years. After 20 years, he confirmed. And I'll still be thankful 20 years from now, and 20 years after that." As they walked back to the house, hand in hand through fields lush with the summer's bounty, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a moment of terror in rising waters to a lifetime of love and partnership. From a lone woman determined to make her way alone to a mother and wife who had found strength in connection. The flood that had nearly taken her life had instead given her a new one, richer and fuller than she could have imagined. And the man who had pulled her from those dark waters had never stopped lifting her up, supporting her dreams while sharing his own. That night, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family, Olivia raised her glass in a toast. "To unexpected blessings," she said, her eyes finding Yates's across the table. "To love that saves us," he returned, his gaze holding all the warmth and devotion of their years together. And as their glasses clinked amid the laughter and chatter of their loved ones, both knew with absolute certainty that some disasters were, in fact, the beginning of the greatest adventures, and that sometimes being trapped was the first step toward becoming truly free.